$25 for the mother. Leave the child. The voice rang through the crowd like a knife cutting through the air. Cold, cruel, and unfeeling. There was a brief pause after that statement, not from shock, but from someone considering whether she was worth the extra few dollars. The girl stood on a wooden platform a meter above the ground. She held a baby sleeping soundly under a faded blanket. The early October sun was not warm enough to erase the bruises on her thin arms that showed through the thin fabric of her patched-up shirt. A blue-purple mark near her wrist, the shape clear as the last mark of a brutal grip. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, 22, widow, no assets, no debts, except her ex-husband Thomas Mitchell, who had left a large debt to the Millfield Mining Company before being crushed by a tree to the north. In the distance, a man stood in the shade of the drugstore, staring straight at the wooden platform. He didn't move, just squinted against the sun. His name was Marcus Wadia Cowboy, who lived 20 miles south of town. He hadn't planned to come here today. His horse had lost a hoof 3 miles before town, forcing him to stop and fix it. And now he was in the middle of a debt auction. The crowd around the platform was like a spectacle. They weren't jostling. They weren't talking. They were just standing there, blank eyes, hands in pockets, some of them chewing tobacco. Below the platform, a fat man in a sweaty vest raised his hand again. I repeat, 25 for the mother. No kid. Oh, laughter erupted from behind. Another man, a pistol strapped to his back, laughed loudly. The mother's good for something. The kid, she can't plow. Sarah said nothing. She just held the baby tighter, as if to hide her from the hundreds of people who were surrounding them like vultures. Marcus saw the fear on her face, but what kept him from looking away was her eyes. Not because they were beautiful, but because they were not giving up. There was still fire in them, a small, weak flame, but not extinguished, as if she was saying, "If anyone will listen, take my baby away from here." Marcus had seen that look before, in the battlefield, on the faces of soldiers with guns gone but still hearts, on the faces of orphans, the last survivors of an artillery barrage. He tightened his grip on the saddle. The crowd was still laughing, still talking, still treating Sarah like a commodity. "I'll take you both, mother and child, for $30. Another voice said. This time, it was Jeremiah Hawk, the old farmer, who had buried 3 wives in 6 years. Rumors said he beat them to death and made up an accident. Sarah began to shake. Her eyes darted around, hoping to find someone in who didn't see her as a commodity. The fat guy, Caleb Bronson, the liquor store owner, laughed. 40, and if she has any sisters, I'll hire her. More laughter. The sound reminded Marcus of the sound of wild animals, cruel and empty. He stepped out of the shadows. 100. Marcus said. His voice was low, but it cut through the crowd like a scalpel. The square fell silent. Heads turned toward him. Bronson's jaw dropped. Hawk's teeth clenched. $100? Someone repeated. Both? Both. Marcus said nothing more. He just placed a heavy leather bag in the bailiff's hands. Sarah turned, getting her first clear look at the man who had ruined the auction. Marcus stared back, unblinking. In those few seconds, something passed between them, not love, not salvation, just a silent agreement. I'm not a good man, but I won't let them kill you. He's crazy. Someone hissed. She's not worth that much. Not her. Marcus said, without needing to elaborate. Her daughter. The bailiff counted out the gold coins with trembling hands, his eyes still in disbelief. Sold, he shouted, as if to cut off any argument. Sold to Mr. Marcus Wade for 100. After the final bid, the crowd erupted, not in joy and shock and disappointment. There was no fun, no more fighting. Only one man had done what no one else had dared. Sarah stood there, not knowing whether to be glad or afraid. But the baby in her arms stirred and opened its blue eyes, just like its mother's. It looked at Marcus, not crying, just looking. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, not looking at his mother. "Emma," Sarah answered, her voice hoarse. "Emma is a beautiful name." Lord. He held out his hand. Sarah looked at it for a moment, not out of doubt, but because no one had ever reached out to pull her back from the abyss. Finally, she took it. The fingers were cold and rough, but real. The audience didn't know what to do. They just parted, like the tide receding when something bigger is coming. And so they walked, a man with calloused hands, a woman who had been considered a living liability, and a child with blue eyes who didn't know he had just been saved with a fortune. "What would you do?" The narrator paused. "If your child was the bargain in the crowd?" No one answered. Only Marcus Wade, the only one who didn't turn away. And that's where the story begins. Marcus Wade had never been the type to draw attention, nor the kind of person who would rush in to save strangers. As the stories in the pubs often told, he lived alone, worked alone, and learned not to bother about things that weren't his business. But that morning in Millfield, when Sarah Mitchell's eyes locked on him, something in him snapped. Not out of pity, not out of duty, but out of a man who had been on the edge of life and death, who had known what it was like to be abandoned. $100, he'd said, and the crowd had gone silent, as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown on a summer day. There was a long silence. The crowd looked at him, then at Sarah, then at each other. No one understood what was happening. The silence didn't last long. "What? Is he crazy?" a man's voice said from the left of the auction block. "What's she worth $100? A widow, a kid, and a mountain of debt," another voice replied. This time a grey-haired woman clinging to the railing of the second-floor store. "Maybe an old flame." Someone whispered, "Or does he feel sorry for her? Or does he want to be a hero? Or make amends?" A man hissed through gritted teeth, "There's definitely something between them." "Unsing. eBay Arshawu," Bronson shouted, his voice no longer sleazy but angry. "Both. I'll take 125. Endu." The saloon keeper was not used to losing. He was used to controlling everything in town with money and intimidation. Sarah was a good deal. Young, pretty, with a sadness that softened the men and made the women jealous. "Ibaiwusha," Marcus said, his eyes never leaving the girl on the platform. Sarah wasn't crying, but she was shivering, not from the cold, because she knew the more people bid, the higher the chance she would fall into the hands of the beast. Every scream was a cut into her and her daughter's survival. 175, Bronson shouted. 200, he roared, like a wounded animal. The whole square was in an uproar now. No one was watching for fun anymore. Everyone could feel it. The auction had turned. This was no longer a game of flesh and blood. This was a battle between two opposing forces. One side was buying power with money. The other was using dignity to say, "No." Marcus took a step forward, his voice low and calm like the wind before a storm. "Wube," he said. No one breathed. That was more than double the price of a thoroughbred, enough to live comfortably for half a year in this area. No one would pay 500 to a woman in debt. No one would be so foolish, except someone willing to trade something bigger. Cash. Marcus added, dropping the heavy leather bag onto the podium in front of the auctioneer. He froze. His hands shook as he opened it. Gold coins glittered in the midday sun, falling into his palms like living proof of the unbelievable. A man behind him said loudly, almost shouting, "He's a madman. He must be trying to redeem himself." The word spread like wildfire. Redemption? For whom? For what? Marcus didn't respond. He looked at Sarah. This time she didn't look down. She looked straight back at him. No questions, no pleas. Just the look of someone with nothing left to lose, save the baby in her arms. "Sold," the auctioneer said, his voice cracking. "Sold to Mr. Marcus Wade for 500. Both." "Oh," Bronson cursed, then turned and walked away, his boots clicking on the hard ground like the final roar of a downed animal. The rest of the group murmured, whispering, speculating about the real reason. They thought of old love, of blood debt, of the regret Marcus had carried with him for all those years of living alone out there. No one thought of the simplest thing. He couldn't turn his back again. He had turned his back once on a girl named Catherine. He hadn't made it back. She had been sold, beaten, and died alone in a cold winter. And since then, Marcus had lived without forgiving himself. He stepped up to the podium. Sarah hadn't moved. He held out his hand. "I'm Marcus Wade," he said softly, as if nothing behind him existed. "I know," Sarah answered, so softly that only he could hear. "The one from Willow Creek." Her eyes were like a deep, still lake, not the eyes of someone who had been saved, but of someone who was waiting to see if her savior would keep his word, if he was really someone else, not like all the men who had come into her life. He took her hand, then reached around, taking the baby with him. Emma woke up, stirred, looked around. Her eyes were deep blue, like a cloudless sky. She was a warrior, Marcus said quietly, as if to himself. She was everything. Sarah replied, and so, amid the curious and indifferent crowd, a man chose to step out of the shadows of his past, and a woman chose to believe in a hand extended in the midst of despair. This time, no one turned away. Not Marcus, and not Sarah. Not again. Not ever. Marcus's farm was tucked away in a red soil hill, where the sun rose slowly and set nearly 10 miles later than the town. It was not a pretty or peaceful place. Weeds grew along the fences, and the stable roof was tilted from last year's storm and hadn't been repaired. But it was quiet. No shouting, no breaking bottles in the night, no drunken men stalking through the bedrooms. For Sarah, it was heaven. In the early days, she barely said anything, just did, waking up earlier than Marcus, feeding the horses, gathering hay, washing the bedding. No one asked, no one ordered, but she couldn't sit still. She had been taught that if she did nothing, she was a burden, and burdens cost money. Marcus didn't say much to her. He gave her a small room, an attic, with windows facing east. Emma was placed in the old wooden crib he'd built for his niece. That first night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by the bed, holding her hand all night. Not because she was afraid of Marcus. It was the quietness of the place that made her uneasy. She had never known a place of peace. On the 5th day, Marcus led her to the stables. "I need someone to help me check Dancer's leg," he said. "This horse only trusts women. He won't let me touch him since that back kick last year." Ugh. Sarah stepped in, her hand raised, palm open, slowly, as if reciting a silent prayer. The horse flinched at first, but then stood still. Sarah whispered something that no one could hear. Marcus stood outside, not intervening, just watching. After a while, Dancer nuzzled Sarah's chest. She smiled. The smile was brief, light as a breeze, but real. And for the first time since he had brought her home, Marcus saw something in her that wasn't bruised, not crushed. Some part of her that was intact, maybe an old memory, maybe a survival instinct, but it was there. That night, Sarah sat by Emma's bed, singing her daughter to sleep. Her voice was hoarse, thin, as if it would break at any moment. There was no clear melody, just fragments of sound. Maybe it was a song her mother had sung when she was a child. Maybe she had made it up on her own during her most painful nights to soothe her daughter to sleep. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. Baby. Tomorrow will be morning. No one will cry. The river will still flow. The birds will still fly. Go to sleep. Baby. I'm still here. Shoo. Marcus heard it from downstairs. He didn't go up. He didn't want to interrupt the moment. He just sat by the fireplace, kneeling down, adding a few logs. The fire crackled as if in response to the singing. A tear rolled from the corner of his eye and fell onto his hand, which he didn't wipe away. The next day, Sarah was washing the blankets when Marcus handed her a cup of hot tea. "You don't have to do all the work," he said. "This farm is big enough for 3 people. Eh?" Sarah looked at him, looking him straight in the eye for the first time. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I didn't know what sitting around would do." There was no anger in her voice, just the stark truth. Marcus nodded, saying nothing more. One afternoon, while Emma slept, Sarah sat on the back steps, cup of tea in her hands, looking out at the withered grass. The sun was about to set. She spoke softly, as if to the wind. "Thomas didn't die by accident." "Not really." Marcus didn't turn around, but he stopped chopping wood. "He worked in the mines," she continued, "and then one day he came home, covered in bruises, said it was a timber fall. But that night, he was delirious, that if they found out he was taking the documents out, they would kill him." Marcus put down the axe and sat across from her. But he didn't interrupt. "He died 3 days later. The police said it was an accident. I didn't believe it, but there was no proof. No one believes a wife who's been beaten." The wind blew through the backyard. A sparrow swooped down near the steps, then flew away. "And Emma, I'm not sure she was his," Sarah continued, her eyes blank. "I was taken one night when Thomas was drunk and had friends over. I don't remember who. I just knew when I woke up. I was pregnant." "No." Marcus said nothing, but his fingers tightened. His face didn't change, but his shoulders tensed. He asked no more questions. No comfort, no reassurance. Just sitting there, like a wall she could lean against if she wanted to. Sarah turned to him. "You still haven't asked me if I'm leaving." "I don't care." Marcus said slowly, "You're free to leave, but if you stay, this is your home. No one will touch you without your permission. No one will make conditions for you beyond survival." She nodded, a vague nod, as if unsure who to trust. But there was no denying that this place was different. That night, for the first time, Sarah slept through the morning. No dreams, no screams. Emma lay still in her crib, as peaceful as if she had never known how cruel the world could be. And Marcus, still up early as usual. But today, as he passed the attic door, he paused for a moment, just a moment, enough to listen to the steady breathing of mother and daughter, Then he went downstairs, chopped more wood, made more tea, and started a new day, as if for the first time in his life he understood what it meant to live for more than just himself. 3 weeks after Sarah and Emma had returned to the farm, the dreamlike peace ended. That morning, a black carriage pulled up to the rotten wooden gate. The driver, a man in a suit, did not smile or bow. He simply handed over a thick envelope stamped with red wax. To Marcus Wade. Inside was a subpoena, demanding that Marcus return Sarah Mitchell and her assets, including her daughter, to the plaintiff, the Millfield Mining Company. On the grounds that the auction had violated federal civil procedure, Marcus said nothing as he read the letter. He set it down on the table, pouring tea slowly, as if he had not heard what was said. But Sarah stood behind him, Emma in her arms. She heard it all. Her eyes did not blink, but her shoulders tightened as if an invisible rope had been tightened around her chest. "They know I'm alive," she said. Marcus nodded. "And they know Thomas kept notes." Old Deb. He did not nod. He did not shake. Just looked at her for a long time, as if to ask in silence, "Do you still have it?" Sarah was silent all day. In the afternoon, she disappeared for an hour. Marcus did not look for her. When she returned, she was holding a small wooden box, its edges worn. Inside were 5 leather-bound notebooks in a man's scrawl, recording every day of work in the mine, unreported accidents, missing persons, illegal payments, even a map of the mining beyond the legal boundary. He knew they would kill him, Sarah said. He said, "If anything happened, keep these," but I didn't think they would dare. Now I know they would. Marcus did not ask why she had never given them up. He understood. For a woman who had been forced to keep silent for so long, withholding the truth was not cowardice. It was survival. The next morning, the whole of Millfield woke to the news. The company was going to seize Marcus Wade's assets. They brought a team of lawyers, 6 in black, accompanied by 4 gunmen with security insignia. But as their carriage approached the farm, they realized that things were not as they had expected. On the eastern hill, dozens of residents were waiting on horseback. Rebecca Martinez led the way, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a shotgun slung over her shoulder. Behind her were farmers, carpenters, even a cowboy from the north. None of them had been hired. None of them had been called. They had come because of a rumor, and for one simple reason: it was time for someone to say no. End will. Marcus stood in the middle of the yard, his hand on his gun holster. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, holding Emma. It was raining lightly. Drops of rain splattered on her hair, but her eyes were still bright. She walked toward the gate, where the company's lawyer, Frederick Whitman, was standing, his long coat and polished shoes unstained by mud. "Miss Mitchell," Whitman began, his tone deceptively polite. "You are the property of the Millfield Company, under the terms of your husband's debt contract. The auction has not been confirmed by the federal court. We have come to take you home." "End will." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said, her voice flat. "No one owns me anymore. Not you. Not your company. Not anyone." "No, you have no right to say that," Whitman growled. "You are just a part of the debt." "Lebla." Sarah held out the wooden box. She opened the lid. The notebooks inside hit Whitman like invisible bullets. "Thomas has recorded everything. Every shady transaction, every hidden accident, every legal milestone. I have enough to take your entire company to court." "So." A moment of silence fell. "You can't prove it," Whitman replied. his voice wavering. "No need. I'll just give it to the district judge. I know the route, and I've got copies of it," Sarah said. Rebecca stepped forward now, lifting the gun from her shoulder. There was a dry clack as she cocked it. Marcus raised the gun, aiming at no one, just to let everyone know that, if necessary, he would shoot. "You came here to buy silence?" Sarah continued. "But the truth can't be bought. We've suffered enough. Now it's your turn to be scared." And Wittmann didn't answer. The gunmen behind him looked at each other. One of them started to back away. No one wanted to be the first to shoot a woman with a baby in her arms, in a crowd of people with real guns, real hearts, real determination. Wittmann took a step back. Then two. Then he turned. "Withdraw," he said shortly. The carriage turned. The company caravan disappeared around the bend in the hill as if it had never been there. But everyone knew that the story would spread. A week later, the notebooks were sent to the district attorney's office. An official investigation was opened. A series of prosecutions were filed. The Millfield Company's directors were suspended. Some fled. Some were arrested. And Thomas Mitchell was found not to have died in an accident, but to have been poisoned by gas in the cellar by someone who had misdirected the ventilation system. Sarah was acquitted. The debt was written off. Other victims in the area rose up to demand justice. Within 2 months, a wave of lawsuits and investigations spread across the West. And the Marcus Wade farm, once considered a hideaway for a deviant, became a meeting place for the unyielding, those who had been silent for too long, those who now knew that the truth could not be locked in a wooden box, could not be burned, could not be bought with money or threats. One evening, after all, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, Emma asleep on her lap. Marcus across from her. She looked at him and spoke, not in the voice of someone who had been imprisoned, but in the voice of someone who had just reclaimed himself. "I'm not afraid anymore." Marcus nodded, smiling softly. "I know. Me too." That was a year after Millfield's change of color. The square where the ruthless haggling once sounded is now filled with flowers and candles every weekend. In the middle, right where the auction block used to be, residents erected a small, simple, unmarked stone pedestal, engraved with just one line, "Where justice begins with courage." That was Zara Mitchell, the woman who was sold as property, now sits on the county's legal advisory board. She doesn't say much when she speaks, but when she does, people listen. She's not a lawyer. She has no formal qualifications, but she understands the fear of the weak. She understands what it's like to be backed into a corner and to stand up at the right time. That makes her voice carry more weight than a judge's. Emma has babbled her first words. She loves to ride dancer, put on her kid's cowboy hat, and run around the yard as if the world has never hurt her. To everyone in the area, she was a symbol of a new beginning, innocent, fearless, and full of hope. Marcus, a man who had lived alone in the darkness of the past, was now called a man of the people. He did not fight with words, did not lead with speeches. He only did what was right when no one else dared, and that was enough to change the way the whole land viewed silence. On a quiet afternoon in early spring, as the sunset painted the fields behind the house, golden seach, Dodd, Marcus knelt on the wooden porch, without a ring, without a prepared speech, just a simple sentence. As was his nature from the beginning, "Let's rebuild everything from here, together. Do you agree?" Sarah did not cry. She did not need to. She just nodded and squeezed his hand. as she had done that day when he had reached out to save her in the auction house years ago. This time, it was not a handshake to survive. It was a handshake to live. Their wedding was simple. No big party, no white dress, just friends, neighbors, and Rebecca Martinez as witnesses. Emma sat on the shoulders of Marcus's younger brother David, waving and giggling as her mother said her vows. Since then, Wade Farm has become more than just a place to stay. It has become a destination. People who have been hurt, who need a fresh start, come here for proof that there are places in the world where faith is not for sale. And like all stories that need an ending, this one doesn't end with a hello. It ends with an action. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like Sarah, like Marcus, like Emma, or turned away because you weren't brave enough to say no, then maybe now is the time to do the opposite. Like, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think needs a glimmer of hope. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to say no to change the world. And sometimes, a new family is made, not by blood, but by choosing to stand by each other in the darkest night. The story ends here, but what it plants in you may be where it really begins.